Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about this TikToker who decided that he was going to attempt, and fail miserably, to debunk Charlie Kirk on crime, say that black people don't commit more crime than any other group in the United States of America, and try to fool you into believing that it is in fact evil, white, and racist to talk about criminality, and that whites are the most criminal. All of these things are contained within this video, and I'm going to debunk, refute, dispute, and absolutely destroy it because it's ridiculous and absurd. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
So Charlie Kirk drops down a bunch of different various numbers on black criminality in the United States of America in this clip that this guy decided to play. And by the way, it's absolutely crucial that you understand that where he chose to play this clip is deceptive in and of itself, just like the rest of this video, because the one stat that Charlie Kirk got incorrect actually came from the crowd around him Googling it and instead finding the historic black prison population, which actually was at certain points in our history over 50% of the prisoners.
Wait, let's pause on that. So you believe that a lot of people who have gone to jail shouldn't be in jail? A small percent. What percent would you say?
5%?
You would say only 5%.
Correct. When you have a system of justice, you're going to have scummy prosecutors, you're going to have bad defense attorneys.
I have a question. Can I get a Google? What percentage of people currently incarcerated are black?
It's way larger than
Well,
five.
it's hold on.
It's what?
Hold on.
It's way larger than
No,
five.
I know, but
Also,
the
when
fact
you're talking
the fact I'm
about
saying
black
the fact I'm saying 5%.
It's caused by the war on drugs.
Hold on a
So
second.
that's the point that I'm trying to make. Exactly.
Who am I debating? Am I debating here? Am
If
I,
your own government's pumping drugs,
yeah. So
Okay, so I want to make a quick
You're
point.
right. Black Americans are in prison far greater than a percentage of the population. So black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes, I
about
know
half
this.
of all prisoners are black.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
So this guy says, we're gonna talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss this. But I just want to point out that he is not at all, at any point in this video, going to address the fact that black people are in and around 13% of the population, and they committed 58% of the homicides. Now, to be fair, the most accurate version of this stat is as follows, that black people are in and around 13% of the population, yet in any given year, they will commit between 46 and 62% of the homicides in the United States of America. It varies depending on the year. But this guy is going to go full denial mode and try to convince you that evil white racists are promulgating these numbers, even though white people commit the most crimes, but his own numbers will betray him. Trust me.
These are obviously racist claims, but I will respond to them as if Charlie Kirk were a reasonable person.
So he says that these are obviously racist stereotypes, racist talking points, racist, as a mechanism to poison the well. But the fact of the matter is, talking about black criminality in a factual way is not racist. You might be uncomfortable with those numbers because you cannot face reality yourself because of your own personal weakness. But the facts are what they are. Black people commit way more crime, and this idiot is going to inadvertently show that to us throughout the course of this video.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes, I
about
know
half
this.
of all prisoners are black.
Wrong. Just 38% of America's prison population is black. That's according to the US government.
So this guy says, wrong, just 38% of America's prison population is black, and that's according to the US government. Well, no, you're wrong on this already, because this is according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it's actually referring to the federal prisoners. So this is not the overall prison population of the United States of America. Just look at that center column right there where it says number of inmates, and maybe, just maybe, if you had any kind of intelligence, any kind of curiosity, that would be a tip-off that we're not talking about the total population, which is well over 1 million of prisoners in the United States of America, and maybe a specific section of the population instead. I mean, again, do you think these numbers are the total population for the country? Asians, 2,347, blacks, 60,679, Native Americans, 4,443, white, 88,696. So there's a bunch that I gotta point out about this specific chart, other than the fact that it is federal inmates and not state and federal inmates combined. So one of the things that should be obvious is that this guy rounded down 38.9% for the black federal population.
Just 38% of America's prison population is black.
to 38%, but he also rounded up 56.8% to 57% for the white.
It makes you wonder why Charlie feels the need to add an additional 12% to the black prison population. Could it be because his bigoted talking points only work if he exaggerates them? If Charlie were actually looking for the race that makes up half the prison population in the US, he'd look no further than white people at 57%.
So rounding up for the whites, rounding down for the blacks. Secondly, if you look at this chart, you might notice something is missing from it, and that of course is the Hispanic population. You have Asian, Native American, Black, and white, but there are no Hispanics at all whatsoever represented on this particular chart. And the reason why is because they're actually rolled in for the purposes of these statistics to the white numbers, and that jumps the white numbers by about 20%. So this guy is mad at Charlie Kirk for rounding up 12% for exaggeration points, while he's rounded up over 20% on the whites by not acknowledging the missing Hispanics from this particular chart. On top of that, to make matters even worse, even if we pretended that Hispanics didn't commit any crimes, they don't represent any population of the federal prisons, these numbers still show that blacks are more criminal than whites. Even if we took these as 100% legitimate, white people are about 60% of the population, and in this chart, even with his rounding up, that would make them 57% of the federal prisoners, while black people, who are between 12 and 13% of the population, are 39% of the federal prisoners. So in every way, shape, or form, this guy is wrong about the numbers that he presented. And when you look at the actual prison population, what you will discover is that blacks are the plurality of prisoners in America's criminal justice system. Now, this comes from Pew, and its source is the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it's comparing it to the Census Bureau, and it has whites at 60% of the population, circa 2017, 30% of the prisoners, Hispanics 16% of the population, 23% of the prisoners, and blacks, who are at 12% of the population, are 33% of the prisoners. So they are the plurality. The numbers in 2017 are actually lower for the blacks in terms of the overall population compared to just the federal population, but obviously they are committing the most crimes. The most. Not the least, not less than white people, not even close, the most, especially when you factor in per capita. And by the way, this is after 10 years of the racial gap between whites and blacks shrinking in the United States of America. There's still more in terms of raw numbers. So this idiot put the wrong source with the wrong prison population, didn't account for Hispanics, didn't realize that even if you pretended Hispanics didn't exist, the numbers still show wildly higher incarceration rates for Black Americans. And of course, he did it while calling Charlie Kirk racist and criticizing his rounding, when all of his results and his intentional rounding up for whites and rounding down for blacks was done deceptively. Nice job, you absolute buffoon.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
Wrong. The word so is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes.
He's saying so, as in therefore, as in one could conclude, but Charlie knows he's lying. Even if he hadn't just lied about the black prison population, Charlie is smart enough to know that correlation does not equal causation, but he's hoping that you don't know that. So he deploys the word so to make you think he's coming to an obvious conclusion.
Exactly.
So blacks
Instead, he's making an illogical racist leap.
So this guy's like, oh, Charlie Kirk is lying. But even if he wasn't lying, which by the way, he wasn't, I just proved it, just because more black people are in prison, which is where you go when you're convicted for crimes, that doesn't necessarily mean they're committing more crimes, which is ridiculous, stupid, insane in every possible way. But this guy actually throws it out there, and he makes it sound a little smart by saying correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. Well, the thing is, when you commit crimes and then you get busted for those crimes, the causation was you committing the crime, and that ends up leading to the effect of you being in prison. And when one group does it more, they're in prison more.
Charlie knows that we don't have usable data about who commits crimes. It's impossible to have that data since so many crimes go both unreported and or unsolved.
So this guy's an absolute idiot from top to bottom, but he speaks with a intelligent sounding cadence. So a lot of people buy into the idea that we just don't have the data because crime goes unreported and we just don't have enough information to actually determine who is committing the crime. And then he, of course, deploys a level 0 argument related to how crime statistics are gathered. And it's pretty embarrassing. It's in fact something that I would expect to hear maybe 5 years ago and dispute on this channel, but it's being thrown out and it's going viral despite the fact that it makes no sense at all.
Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment.
So this guy says we only have data on arrests and convictions, and he pulls up really quickly the Uniform Crime Report from 2019, and then he pulls up something else really quickly, which I'm assuming is related to convictions, and says we'll talk about this later. But I've decided that we should talk about this now, because one of the number one fallacies, one of the number one ways you know somebody has no clue what they're talking about is if they believe that crime is measured in arrests. The Uniform Crime Report does have numbers on arrests, but let's be clear about this. Crime is measured in reports. Crime is measured not in arrests, but in reports. If they find a body, somebody is dead, and they don't arrest the suspect and they know it's a murder, it gets recorded in the crime statistics as a homicide. And if you don't believe me, don't worry about it, because I'm going to link all of my sources in the description of this video, as well as all of his sources, so you could check his information and realize how wrong he is. And I'm using the 2019 Uniform Crime Report, Table 25, for my source, because that's the report that he brought up and flashed on screen and said he was going to get back to it. And as you could see, they have offenses known and then a percentage of offenses that are cleared by arrest, and then it goes by the category. Now that says 45.5% are cleared by an arrest, so obviously that means that 54.5% of these crimes that are reported are not arrest data. They're reporting data. Again, this is a basic thing in crime statistics. This is something that you learn at level 0.1. This guy's still on level 0, and it's embarrassing.
Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment.
On top of that, if a crime goes unreported, we still have a way of measuring it. Again, since 1972, we've conducted something called the National Crime Victimization Survey. And for the 4 major categories, but obviously not homicide, because the victims of homicide aren't great at filling out surveys, we ask people if they've been victimized. We ask them if they know the person that victimized them. We ask them for gender. We ask them for race. And they provide us numbers each and every year. This absolute idiot is pretending that that's not one of the most comprehensive surveys on crime victimization in the world. Also, local police departments do this as well. And by the way, the reason we do this is because unlike this absolute doofus who just figured out or thought in his brain, whoa, but if they don't make an arrest, how do they measure the numbers? People figured this out decades ago. And in fact, not only do we have this data, but we can use the data from the victimization surveys, those people who can identify the race of the perpetrator of the crime that they report was committed against them, and compare and contrast that to the Uniform Crime Report data on arrests. And one of the things that we discovered in 2021 when the Bureau of Justice Statistics did a study on this is that according to the National Crime Victimization Survey, 33% of the perpetrators of these crimes that aren't murder, because obviously victims of homicide can't fill out surveys, were black. And the arrest data showed us that 34.9% of those who were arrested were black. And remember what I said about the incarceration data that showed us about a third of the prison population, 33%, are black. So what we find out is whether you're doing reporting, arrests, or victimization surveys that are completely separate from law enforcement, blacks commit, absent murder, 33% of the crimes in the United States of America, despite being 13% of the population. Again, all of my sources and his sources will be linked in the description of this video.
Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment. What's painfully obvious is that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he so carelessly misquotes. He's interested in making bad faith arguments.
The absolute irony of this guy saying it's painfully obvious that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he quotes, as he quotes federal prison statistics that don't include Hispanics, where they're rolled into whites, so he can make bad faith arguments. And by the way, he represented that as the national prison population. What an absolute goof in every possible way.
He's interested in making bad faith arguments, something that becomes even more obvious in his next point.
Blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Wrong again, and loud this time. If Charlie were interested in honesty, he would have mentioned the other 1350 statistic. Yes, black people are about 13% of the population, but make up 53% of all criminal exonerations. In fact, black people make up 55% of all murder exonerations specifically.
This is one of the most embarrassing misdirects I've ever seen in my entire life. This guy goes to the National Database of Exonerations and says, wow, the real 1350 stat is that black people are 13% of the population, but they represent 55% of the exonerations for murder. Checkmate, bigot. But the thing is, I'm not an idiot. I wasn't born yesterday. I'm not this person. I understand that these numbers in no way, shape, or form at all whatsoever change the murder stats that we see from the FBI. So let's actually go to the page and show you the rest of it that this guy didn't point out, so I can demonstrate what an absolute fool he is. So as you can see, this is the exact same chart that he showed, and what you can see for yourself is that there are, according to this chart, 1,167 murder exonerations, wink wink. So this article came out on October 7th, 2022, and this says that it's all the exonerations, according to this registry, that date back to the year 1989. Now, for those of you who aren't great at mathematics, what we're gonna say is that would be a 32-year time period. And in this 32-year time period, according to this chart, there are this many exonerations. That is 1,167. But we're not talking about 1,167 black murder exonerations. We're talking about 55% of that. So we take that number and we multiply it by 0.55 to get 55%. And what we end up discovering is that the total number of murderers that were black, that were exonerated, according to the numbers that this guy put up, are 641.85. Now we will round that up to 642, and when we divide that by the 32-year time frame that we're given in this chart, that ends up giving us about 20 black murderers that are allegedly exonerated every year. Now when we go to the Uniform Crime Report of 2019, which is the one that I'm using because he flashed it on screen really quickly, we find out exactly how many known black murderer suspects are present there by looking at this particular chart. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering about where Hispanics are, they are on this side of the chart in the ethnicity category because the stats are actually present here. And what we see is that when you combine the race of all the black offenders from this particular year, which by the way are in this category right here, all of them vertically, you get 3,218. And when you divide that by the 20 exonerations, if we believe that to be true, what you end up finding out is that if you are convicted of murder and you are a black person, then there's only 1 in 160.9 chance that you are going to be exonerated in the future, if we accept all of these exonerations to be legitimate, which by the way, I definitely don't. Now, another thing that is incredibly deceptive in this data that he presented, which by the way has nothing to do with Charlie Kirk and what he presented, because obviously 1 in 160 cases being a quote-unquote exoneration is less than 1% of the overall cases, is the idea that he tried to sneak into your mind, which is if a black person is exonerated for a homicide, then that must mean that the real killer, wink wink, is not another black person, when the exact opposite is more likely to be true. Again, people are typically killed by people of their same race, and if you misidentify a suspect, it's unlikely that when you identified a black person, you actually meant to identify a Chinese person. Like, we understand how this works, that if there's a drive-by shooting and they get the wrong gangbanger in the drive-by shooting, chances are the other gangbanger looked close enough to the approximate to that particular shooter. So this guy is an absolute idiot in every possible way, and this argument right here has nothing to do with anything. Again, if you're actually interested in understanding the statistics rather than making bad faith arguments, you would actually be able to present this in an adequate way to prove your points. But your points are asinine. You're just trying to call people racist because you're uncomfortable by the state of black criminality in the United States of America.
Black people are more likely than any other group in this country to be convicted of crimes they did not commit. And then people like you have the nerve to parade these stats around as though they prove something.
The irony of that statement coming from this individual, the absolute audacity for this guy to say, you have the nerve to parade these stats around as if they prove your point, when he is parading stats around that he either doesn't understand or is inserting deceptively in there in order to trick you, that nowhere near prove his point. Again, he just tried to address the idea that black people commit well over half of the murders in almost every year in this country, despite being 13% of the population, with some exoneration numbers that again, even by those numbers, don't represent a significant portion of those arrested and convicted for murder who are black. And on top of all of that, those numbers don't necessarily prove that the real killer, wink wink, in those cases isn't another black person.
The reality is that you probably know these stats, but you leave them out on purpose, because to bring that stat into this conversation would make some people think, and that's the last thing a person like you wants.
Again, the irony, the guy's like, in reality, you probably know these stats. I mean, in reality, this guy pulled up and put up on screen the 2019 stats that cover murder by race. He said, we'll get back to them, never got back to them, because probably when he looked those stats in the face, they made him uncomfortable, and he decided that he'd rather hide from it. He decided that he'd rather pull up random exoneration data as if that proved anything at all. And the crazy thing about this is that this guy goes out of his way to accuse Charlie Kirk of lying and being deceptive and all of that, when the only thing that Kirk was factually incorrect about was something that he got from the crowd, when in contrast, this guy got everything wrong. He got every stat that he put forward wrong. He rounded up inappropriately, rounded down inappropriately, and he presented all this look over here kind of things, and he didn't even know that we don't measure crime in arrests, we measure it in reports, and for unreported crime, we have the National Crime Victimization Survey, and those also show that black people disproportionately commit more crime than any other group of people, again, according to the victims in both reported and unreported crimes. Embarrassing in every possible way, shameful in every possible way. This guy's an absolute clown. He's on TikTok, apparently that nonsense flies really well over there, but it's not based in fact, and it's honestly a humiliating experience for somebody to post a video like this and have literally everything wrong. Again, even the basics, how we measure crime. Is this the United States prison population or just federal prisoners? Absurd, insane, asinine. This is confirmation bias to the max. This is somebody who thinks because he sounds kind of smart that he's a lot smarter than he actually is, going up against somebody who actually knows his information. And what's worse about this is that he lost an argument to Charlie Kirk when it was a video. You have every advantage when you're responding to somebody else's video because they can't talk back, and this guy still lost the debate. It's absolutely crazy, honestly. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about this absolute craziness. Till next time.